Hello, everyone. Salim Barahmed, the director of PIPD here. I want to welcome you to another episode of Dardashe, a series where we talk to amazing and inspiring Palestinians about their lives and careers. Today, we're joined with Chaker Khazaal, a Palestinian author, award-winning author and reporter. Chaker, welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's good to be in Beirut and Ramallah.
How are things in Beirut? How are you? How is everything in Beirut? How are your family and friends?
Well, everyone is relatively okay. I mean, if we're alive, we are okay today after, that horrible incident, horrible crime, actually. Mm-hmm. Yeah, everyone is still in a state of shock. You can see it. I was just in a meeting and everyone's still, you can tell they haven't emerged back. And it's going to take a time to heal, like for everyone. I mean, when you look out, you see broken windows now everywhere. So it's sad.
It is. And what are people still in the moment of, or in the period of like rebuilding, reconstruction, getting their lives back together? What's the mood? And the number one question I see asked is, how can people from around the world still help?
Well, the mood right now, yeah, people are rebuilding, but there's also an economic crisis in Lebanon. Glass, aluminium, everything, the prices are up. People don't have money. There's COVID lockdowns. People are not working. The majority of the people of Lebanon are based on day-to-day living. So with the lockdown, the income here is affected. The dollar has crashed. The local currency has crashed in relativity to the dollar. So, and then the banks have people's money. They're not giving them their money. So all that put together, it's not hard to get up on your feet with, So this brings me to your next question. Yeah, Beirut needs help. People of Lebanon need help. Plenty of organizations. I can't, recommend one because there's so many. I guess people will have to look into, who they want to support and what ways they're passionate about supporting. And then, we all have a Google account today. So yeah.
Absolutely. Are people at all hopeful about any sort of political change or change that is needed to take Lebanon in the right direction for the future?
It depends who I'm going to be, I'm not a Lebanese citizen, so I'm going to be talking from my account as someone here, been here for a few months and with plenty of friends. So just looking at the general atmosphere, everyone has had it. So there is full rejection of the authority. Even, people, a driver who I, go with sometimes, he used to praise one specific political leader and one party just, last year. Today, he doesn't want anything to do with them.
Yeah.
This is an important stage for them because change usually goes through several stages. And I believe the explosion was the tipping iceberg of this fiasco. So yeah, there is hope. When you look into these things, there is hope. And people of Lebanon are aware that, the leadership needs to be replaced.
Yeah, from Palestine, we were following the events. Even a couple months ago when people took to the streets and were protesting, and also with the explosion, the criminal act, as you call it, we're sending a lot of solidarity and Palestinians and Lebanese, we're the same people.
Yeah. I'm Palestinian and I send solidarity from my Lebanese side. Same thing. Same thing with Palestine. Same thing, Lebanon. Like, look at you, look at me, look at how we, does our leadership look like us? No. When I look into the leadership, I'm talking now Lebanon, Palestine, because these are two countries I'm related to. Today, it's time for this new blood, new names. I don't want to see the same last names over and over. For the last 30 years, it's for Lebanon. For the last, so many decades for Palestine. No, we need new names. People who are qualified for, running an office in the 2020s. How can a president not know how to use his Facebook page today? In Lebanon, it took an explosion for now people to say, hold on. And I'm seeing that shift. I don't know what it's going to take for the Palestinian state.
There's definitely a crisis of representation. And I think for Palestinians, I think the representation has been limited to one Palestinian community, which is either the Palestinians in the West Bank or the Palestinians in Gaza. And there are different forms of representation. What we lack even more so is a political system that allows me as a Palestinian here, Palestinians in Jordan, in Lebanon, all around the world, to be part of the decision-making process of shaping our future and putting a new vision that is inclusive of all of us. And
Absolutely.
yeah, it's frustrating for sure. Absolutely. I wanted to ask you about, so, with COVID has impacted vulnerable communities more so. It's shown systems of injustice, and I'm sure also the explosion has done so as well. But some of the most vulnerable communities in Lebanon are those who live in refugee camps, right? Palestinian refugee camps. And you grew up in a refugee camp in Beirut. For a lot of people listening to us, they don't know that there are Palestinian refugees in Lebanon to start with, let alone what they live like and what life there is like. So would you be able to tell and share your story with the people around the world?
Yeah, well, I have my memoir coming out in a month, so I need people to buy my book out.
Perfect. It's a great plug. It's a great plug.
So I don't know how much I can share from no, I'm joking. So yeah, I grew up in Burj al-Barajni camp, which is one of the Palestinian camps in Beirut. I believe 12 or 13 Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon. I might be mistaken with the number. I'm not very good with numbers. But anyways, my camp, like the camp I grew up in, 1 kilometer square right by the airport in the southern suburb of Beirut. 25,000 people when I lived there. This is in the early 90s. Now probably almost double that because of all the Syrian displacement in the last 10 years. The Iraqi, we've been making more and more refugees, sadly, especially in our part of the world. A refugee camp here in Lebanon, it's like a small city within the city. There used to be tents, and then tents became cemented buildings, and sort of an internal economy is taking place there because people have relatives overseas, they send them money, and then a lot of internal activities, the people who sell the meat, and so that. What else? Good thing about the camp is the community. It's a Palestinian community all in one place. People still, like there are a few elderly left, so that the essence of Palestine and aura and stories of Palestine are still circulating among generations. Now, the dark parts of displacement in Lebanon is a Palestinian cannot use public schools here, public hospitals, and cannot work in so many sectors. And back in the 90s, a Palestinian couldn't work in almost every single job. Now there are some changes, but it's still really bad, especially when the Lebanese economy has taken the hard hit. And people love soccer in the camp. So the World Cup is the biggest event every 4 years. I guess that's an additional thing to add.
How are you brought up a really interesting point that some Palestinians from the older generation are still alive and are able to pass on a lot of the stories and the memories of Palestine. What were your first interactions, or what was your first exposure to Palestine as a child? And how did that form part of your identity?
It's a big part of my book. So I'll summarize. It's still fresh in my hand. See, I was very close to my grandfather, who's from Tarshiha in the north. That's why I love Tarshiha as an adult so much, because my grandfather left when he was 15, then he was not allowed to return back. So in his entire life, he lived in displacement on the hope that he will see Tarshiha again. That romantic story in itself of the grandfather, the grandson, the Palestine, the homeland, the Tarshiha, the memories, everything is what made me, I say in the book, Palestine is much nicer without politics. Palestine is way more beautiful when it comes to these stories of a 15-year-old on his horse in Tarshiha. And then they tell him, you have to come to Lebanon. And then he has to live in a refugee camp. He no longer can go to Akka, and he no longer can go to Haifa. Really, like, I would understand it today because I was denied entry by Israel a few months ago, which actually, and now I'm contesting this in courts. So from, my experience and someone telling me you're not allowed to go to a place, especially when it's my ancestral home, it's such, like, for me, for the last few months since this happened, it psychologically affects you. So I can only imagine what happened to a man for 60 years in exile. It must have been, the hardest thing. So then for him, it was therapeutical to talk to me about Tarshiha And for me, how beautiful is it to live in a place and to imagine it just from the words of a story? I think that's one of the main pillars of storytelling, which it became my profession in life.
Yeah. No, I mean, what is happening to you, and I think to explain to a lot of people around the world, Palestinians, whether they're refugees or part of the diaspora, a lot of them are not allowed to come back to Palestine or to visit through Israeli
I came
borders.
on my Canadian passport.
You had to come on your Canadian, but even now with your Canadian, they're still preventing you from entering. So millions of Palestinians have never had the chance to visit or live in their homeland. And there's the sense of discrimination because there's a law of return in Israel that allows every Jewish person from anywhere around the world to come back. And that's the inequality and the level of discrimination. I wanted to ask you, when was it the first time you went back to Tarshiha? How old were you and what was that like for you?
It was in 2015, so I was 27 years old. And again, when you live for 27 years on a picture in your head, and not any picture, a picture given to you by someone so passionate about every single detail. So I remember and again, well, I'm not like promoting my book this much, but I'm still in the mood of ouch. So, no, it was like, you know, everyone goes to the pilgrim, everyone religious wants to go to their pilgrimage, wherever that is. For me, my pilgrimage became Tarshiha because it was a lot of stories and a lot of building up for the momentum of meeting. It's like as if you met someone on Tinder and for 27 years you're chatting on Tinder and then it's time to meet.
Definitely one way of putting it, yeah.
You relate to that. Yeah, so Tarshiha was my Tinder date, and it's a date that went beautifully until I was denied, you know, to reunite. And now I'm in courts trying to contest that.
Yeah. I've been to Tarshiha once. I need a permit to go, and they're not easy to come by. And so I was able to visit Tarshiha once, and it's quite beautiful. It's you know, in the Galilee. It's surrounded by.
I love the Galilee.
Yeah, it's one of the most emotional moments I had in my life as a Palestinian. I grew up in Jericho, so it's you know it's an oasis, but it's surrounded by desert. And so I didn't realize the diversity of our country. And so when I was able to drive across the Galilee for the first time and see the mountains and the green, and I was very moved. It's a very beautiful part of the world.
Good. Well, hopefully soon we go together.
Inshallah. When you win your court case, I'll try to get a permit and we can visit.
Inshallah.
So you grew up and then you left to Canada to study. Was that part of the journey?
Yeah, I left first as part of an exchange program in the early 2000s, and then in 2004 I made I started making the big move. I moved to Toronto to study.
To study. And what brought you to write your first book?
I like writing. Again, I'm my grandfather's grandchild, and someone who grew up listening to stories becomes a natural storyteller. So I it's one of my things that I like about the way I interact with people through the art of storytelling.
Yeah, and did you struggle essentially? So for me, I also went and studied abroad, and one thing I struggled with early on is reconciling my Palestinian identity, my experiences with, I think, societies that usually dehumanize us. And so it's trying to communicate a story that is able to resonate and deliver some form of empathy and shared experience. So I was wondering if your writing was essentially a form of that, or what kind of environment and culture and landscape did you arrive in Canada?
So first, regarding the writing, my main goal is to humanize a Palestinian. Like the common element between my 5 books now, Confessions of a War Child, it's about a refugee who dreams to be a president. Tale of Tala, it's about a Palestinian prostitute. Ouch, it's my life now and my memoir. All of them, they do contain either, Tala and Ouch, it's Palestinian main characters, and Confessions of a War Child, it's inspired by Palestinian stories. There's always that Palestinian that I love putting in not a new, but in a different positioning. For example, And I think this was a shortcoming from us as Palestinians in the way we marketed our cause. The Palestinians here were forgotten, and then we became here the forgotten people. So out of this made the whole cause just get lost in between occupation and in between so many things. We didn't know how to market our stories in a way where, no, a Palestinian, I don't want sympathy, I don't want anything. I don't want to be a victim. Okay, my land, there's an issue around it. My grandfather is not at his home. I got the Canadian citizenship. I visited. Sadly, I wasn't allowed entry. But these stories of the grandfather and the grandson, every single one relates to them. So the relatability of stories, of Palestinian stories, in the way we export it to the world, is where we need to think not of us. We need to think of that guy on a subway in New York, or that woman in her office in London reading my book or watching a Palestinian movie. There needs to be some relatability. Why did Omar make it to the Oscars? Because every two people fall in love, and every two people will have that, that villain that may come in between their love story. See, I relate to that. But how would I relate if I'm in, South America? How would I relate to some of the stories that emerged from us? That's all about, it's the war. Yeah, war is, we make art out of war. We make movies and books and everything. But the way we present it, we always tend to forget the relatability. We tend to just, show our environment as if we're the ones who are going to be speculating on it.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
So yeah,
I agree with you. Yeah. Go on. Sorry.
So even with Tala, the Palestinian prostitute, I wanted to introduce, the Palestinian woman, but not in the traditional way of its presentation. I want to present of this effect of displacement and war, that it led a young girl to sell her body. Ask any child, what do you want to be in the future? No child will tell you, I want to grow up to sell my body. Then you're going to realize why, the reason why there's displacement and what displacement does to the psychology and the lives of people.
For sure. I wanted to ask you, have you faced challenges in terms of sharing the story of Palestine in these different ways? Because there's a phenomenon now around the world of shrinking space where a lot of people are trying to make the Palestinian issue or being Palestinian radioactive, right? Whether through smear campaigns, whether through attacks, especially in the West. Have you encountered any of that, any difficulty in the way you tell the story, or just being Palestinian in certain spaces?
I mean, it's very hard for someone to come in between a grandfather and a grandchild, whatever their nationality, whatever it is. I'm saying a human story. Again, Palestine for me, there's no room for politics. I have forgotten about that element of politics with it because it's not clear for me. I really need to be way more knowledgeable to understand the politics of this place. And I need to wait till few people die and leave us. Eventually they will, because they're elderly, so old. Eventually they're leaving. So I'm waiting for that phase to be over, because then we can start seeing okay, what is the politics of this? Now, of course, when I talk grandfather, grandson, some people will come and say, oh, your grandfather did not come from Palestine. There was no Palestine.
Sure.
Okay. Then I just take that video of Golda Meir talking about Palestine. I answer him with a lady that I'm sure every Israeli looks up to, Golda Meir.
Sure.
Every person who wants to say there's no Palestine will have to wait and see. No, Golda Meir is talking about Palestine. So sometimes it's our role here to answer these attacks. Or these accusations that are not necessary, So I wouldn't say attacks, it's more dismissing certain things, and I'm more than open to discuss it. Sure. If someone comes and tells me, your grandfather left because he left, well, no, I'll share with them the story that a 95-year-old in Tarshiha told me of the whole war that was happening back then, that people didn't just leave. No one just leaves their home. People have a reason to leave their home. In this case, they just wanted to flee the war. So it's attacks that opens dialogue, and sometimes an ignorant person will just, you shouldn't talk to an ignorant person who's holding onto the last strand of their ignorance, period.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to ask you a bit more about the Palestinian community in Lebanon, in the refugee camps. We talked a bit about the Palestinian fragmentation geographically, but also politically, right? We talked about the lack of a political system that is able to represent us all. And so it's very hard for me as a Palestinian from the West Bank and a Palestinian who lives in a refugee camp in Beirut to be able to talk about what we want, what is the shared future of what we want. Do these conversations, are they ongoing in the refugee camps of what they want to happen beyond just the local, but on a national Palestinian level? I'm sure it's centered around the right of return. But you
Not really.
No,
not really. The new generation see, the right of return was really trending in the 1990s and the 1980s, the 2000s, because Yasser Arafat and his group made very good, PR for the right of return. I mean, back to my uncle, he left university because of the right of return. He ended up in a graveyard in 1978. And in the early 90s, he ended up a forgotten person by people who went to make agreements without being too knowledgeable about the agreements they're signing on behalf of an entire nation. So, no, today, from my experience talking to young Palestinians here, they just want to get the hell out of the Arab world. They want to get the hell out of Lebanon. They want to immigrate Australia, America, anywhere. They would just want to get out of here. They've had enough failed promises.
Yeah.
They're living in they're living horrific conditions in camps. Can you imagine living your entire life in a camp? I mean, this in a 1 kilometer square where you cannot even work, where how you live is how you're gonna die, where ambitions are so limited, where success is just a dream that one gets out of every 10 years. Or when someone is living this, are you serious? You want to come to them and tell them right of return? They don't. Most of my people today in the camps, when I see them, we hang out and everything, the first thing they say, we want to immigrate. Right away. That's what they want to do. So I think that's another shorting of us as Palestinians. We turned the right of return into something because of our failed promise record to our own people, like within our own communities, whether in Ramallah or the PA and the Arab in Lebanon, so the right of return became that guy in Washington, D.C. who has the American passport, sipping on his cappuccino, or the Palestinian Canadian. We talk about the right of return, and we do conferences about it, and we go asking for money regarding it. We run campaigns for it. Bullshit, man. When I want to talk about the right of return, I want to talk to that kid in Burj who has his university starting in a month, but he can't afford even dreaming about university. That kid, is he going to talk to me about the right of return? He wants to talk to me about his tuition fees first. His mother's sick at home, and he wants to talk to me if Canada or anywhere can take him so he can at least live without fear of the future. There's a Palestinian embassy, a shameless Palestinian embassy in Beirut that limits its services to the refugees because, one of the fanciest buildings, a great building and everything, but the refugee is not counted. There's UNRWA for the refugee.
No, that's very sobering. And I think it's a very powerful wake-up call. So I guess the question for you is, also a lot of the Palestinians here are very much worried about their immediate issues, problems, challenges. How do I pay for school? How do I pay for electricity? How do I pay my bills? How do I get a job? Also, unemployment is extremely high here, etc. So the question is how can Palestinians help, right? Each other. How can a Palestinian political system and political leadership help Palestinians in Lebanon in a way that's meaningful, right? Whether it's in their day-to-day issues and problems and challenges, or is it in a way that's connected more to the national struggle of Palestinian freedom and rights and return?
I think the one word is to invest. Today, we need to activate our economy. So today, if we want to help one another, we don't help by giving aid and everything. I mean, of course we do. Some people are so vulnerable that we can't today economically activate them. But where is the budget that's going to young Palestinian entrepreneurs in Lebanon? And this is not help. They're idiotic. This can bring revenue. This is what economy is. Why am I not seeing more Palestinian businesses organized, an economy? A nation will never see liberty, should never ask for even liberty if it hasn't looked into its economy. How?
I absolutely hear you. I guess the question was, how do we, so the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon have been forgotten. That we agree on.
Mhm.
The question is, how can we address some of the systemic issues that they deal with on a day-to-day, in a day-to-day way, but also how do you reconnect a lot of the young Palestinians that are really frustrated with all the empty promises, all the broken promises, the Palestinians that just want to immigrate and get out of there, to be able to reconnect with the Palestinian struggle on a larger scale. Both need to be done. It's not one or the other, but how can Palestinians do that for each other again?
Well, the first thing is on individual level, because today when I go on my Twitter, I see 4 or 5 cases, Palestinian, either a retweet or something that we could actually step in and support. I mean, the other day, I just made one contact with one person. That one person is a family, and that family goes. So systematically, these individual cases that we encounter, we need to start actively looking for them. That's how you get something moving. So that's on one level. On another level, we need to come up with a deal with the host country. I mean, can we actually, if the PA or the people in charge of the Palestinian affairs, if they're confident that the situation, that these Palestinians will return to Tarshiha in 30 years or 20 years, then let a deal be around that. But you can't have no deal in your mind, not even prepared for a deal, like now with the UAE signing with Israel. Okay, you have an opinion. I see a lot of blah, 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 blah. I haven't read one single piece or one thing which is pure of emotion, which says, okay, we don't like this, but this is what we need. And if they do, which they'll end up doing after costing them that, you know how much it will cost to put on a report. After this, they'll put on a nice report, shared, forgotten. So systematically, you can't address that system until there's right representation. Once you have right representation and right committees, then you have a committee that can negotiate with the Lebanese, with this host country. This is how you fix the system. But I can't tell you what things we can do right now.
There's a crisis of representation, basically. So the first step for you is to reignite Palestinian political representation, where Palestinians from Lebanon are able to shape the decision-making system and the direction. Okay, yeah, and I think a lot of Palestinians crave that all over the world.
We can make it in a very peaceful and nice way of coexistence, of respect, of everything, but when we have the right representation.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. It's time for something new. Thank you for an extremely sobering and powerful message and interview. I think it's going to resonate with many people around the world. Thank you for your time. And also stay safe, stay healthy. And we look forward. You want to just mention you said you're writing a memoir. It's coming out. It's called Ouch. Do you want to give people details about that? And we can link it whenever the interview is out.
Sure. Ouch will be out October 17th, and it's a detailed memoir with a focus on the last 6 months of here in Beirut, from COVID to the court with Israel, to the explosion. And I will be talking about a lot of personal things, even things for the first time, to talk about them, share them with people, with readers. And again, out of that connection, out of retelling the Palestinian story in a way that doesn't have in a 2020 style, not 1948.
Looking forward to it. Thanks so much, Chaker. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Salim. Thanks.